Hi, everybody. Welcome to the fourth day of the Trauma Recovery Coaching Summit, sponsored by the International Association of Trauma Recovery Coaching. So Sarah and I are here today to talk to you about why reconnection and relationship is so important in trauma recovery. Okay, so Sarah, if reconnection is important, that must mean somewhere along in our trauma journey, we got disconnected.
Absolutely, yeah. Trauma is just so destructive. It completely changes the way we see ourselves, the world around us, and others. Especially if our trauma was happened in a personal relationship as well. Interpersonal trauma. It disconnects us from ourselves. We learn not to love ourselves. We learn that we're unworthy, we're not good enough, and things like that. And it disconnects us from others as well. We learn that people aren't safe. If we have experienced trauma in a relationship, then we learn that people can be dangerous. They cannot be safe, sort of thing. So that means that we don't trust other people. And then it disconnects us from the world around us, especially if our abuse happened as little as in childhood, sort of thing. It teaches us that the world is just not a safe place. So we disconnect from it. Again, we just don't trust it.
Yes, and relationship is so important when we're working with people, especially those who have interpersonal trauma, which, as Sarah said, is a trauma that is sustained in the course of a relationship. So domestic violence, childhood sexual abuse, harassment at work, stalking, all of those are examples of interpersonal trauma. Well, the thing is that we need then to heal some of the damage within the context of a relationship. We can't just go somewhere and sit down with a coach or a therapist and talk about what things were like and have the therapist or coach describe to us, what relationships should look like and send us out into the world to go find those. It's a little bit like trying to teach someone how to drive by describing how a car works without ever letting them get behind the wheel of the car. You can't just say, okay, now that I've taught you how you're going to steer, go out and take the test, see if you can pass. Well, it's going to be really hard to pass because they didn't have the context of learning the skills within the vehicle. It's the same as we can't learn how to heal the damage just by talking about what happened. We have to have a relationship and learn how to do things within that relationship in order to heal from our trauma. Okay, Sarah, so if trauma disconnects us, what specific things happen within a traumatic circumstance or interpersonal trauma that impact us as children and adults?
Absolutely. So, when we are brought up in abusive not abusive relationship, but an abusive childhood, we can struggle with the lack of attachment. When everybody is born into this world, we have an innate drive, innate bond into bonding with our caregivers. We cannot survive on our own when we are children. We have to have a caregiver to look after us, to care for us, to love us, to feed us, to water us, to give us a roof over our head, for us to be safe in. But unfortunately, if we are brought up in a dysfunctional family, abusive family, something which is chaotic, unfortunately, we are going to separate. We are not going to be able to attach to our caregivers or anybody who should be safe to us, because they're teaching us that they're not safe. So we are going to move away from them. We are going to disattach from them, which unfortunately, by doing that, then impairs us from learning basic skills which we need. Basic skills like emotional development, and then skills of then having relational skills, because we haven't got that attachment anymore.
Yes, exactly. And one of the ways that that impacts our brain development is, I don't know if you guys have all seen that pyramid. This is my sign for pyramid, that talks about childhood development. So the first layer is also the largest, and it is survival needs. So this is where we learn to trust that our caregivers will take care of us, and learn that the world is a pretty safe place for us to exist in. And from that, it goes up into developing cognitive skills, developing social skills, and learning how to be our authentic self. But if children are raised within a chaotic and toxic home, they develop what we call it as a bottom-heavy brain, meaning they stay in this initial safety and security layer, because that's the sum total of what they get to experience as a child. They are spending their days trying to stay safe, perhaps trying to secure what they need in terms of food. They don't get the luxury of moving up into cognitive development or developing social skills. Instead, those are, they're left by the wayside. But of course, then what you end up with is an adult who doesn't have good social skills and can't build healthy relationships.
Absolutely. And then, not being have healthy relationships, which, again, is something that should automatically be modeled to us, and if we are brought into abusive and chaotic family, we're just not modeled it. So we just don't know what a healthy relationship looks like. No wonder why we go into adulthood struggling to navigate our way through relationships, because we just don't know what healthy looks like.
Yes.
We know what chaotic looks like. We know what unhealthy looks like. We can do that really, really well. But to know what healthy looks like, sometimes it can look quite scary sometimes.
Yes.
Because it's just not familiar to us. And anything which is not familiar to us can be scary, But unfortunately, sometimes we as adults, when we grow into adults, because we don't know what healthy looks like, we can fall into still unhealthy relationships, even though they can still look miles times better than what we had originally come from. They might not hit us anymore, and we think, oh, that's amazing, but they still can be really, really unhealthy.
Yes.
So it's one of the ways that we as coaches can come alongside our clients and teach them, what healthy looks like.
Yes. And another area where we see it impact brain development is when we look at how the brain develops while it's feeling like it's under constant threat. One of the ways that our bodies were created, and to protect ourselves and stay alive, we have this fight or flight response system. So it's meant to operate in, if we see a life or death threat, then our body puts out cortisol and adrenaline, and we can run faster and hit harder and lift heavy things. Well, we were only meant to have those chemicals periodically in our body. So for those of us who were raised in dysfunction and toxicity, or who entered into adult relationships where it is constant threat to our survival, then we end up with those chemicals in our brain much, much more often than is healthy for them to be there. So our brains are sitting in this chemical toxic soup, and it impairs our brain development. Our prefrontal cortex does not fully form the way that it would for someone who is raised in a healthy home. And our amygdala, which is the threat response, emotional response center of the brain, it then enlarges and becomes overactive. So things that others don't see as a threat, we see as a threat. And we then begin to react. And, you know, for most people, things in our environment come into our brain and they go to our prefrontal cortex, all right? And it does the reasoning and the logic and goes, no, I think that's okay. I think we're fine. You know, I don't think that's a threat. But for those of us who were raised in those dysfunctional homes, information from our environment comes in and it goes whoop, right over the top of our prefrontal cortex and settles in our amygdala. And our amygdala has that hair trigger response, and so it perceives threat where there really isn't any. But then that kicks us into fight or flight, and our prefrontal cortex is offline, and our amygdala has hijacked our emotions, and we look like someone who is overreacting, or needy, or too sensitive, or too emotional, when the reality is we're none of those things. We are coping with brain damage from the abuse that we suffered. But more often than not, we struggle to have healthy relationships because being in fight or flight all the time does not lend itself to having healthy relationships.
Yeah, exactly. And that kind of then brings us into that, you know, we then also struggle to self-soothe.
Yes.
You know, self-soothing is a capacity to be able to comfort ourselves when we are distressed, you know, when we are in that fight mode or flight mode or, you know, fawn mode sort of thing. We are able to help ourselves to self-soothe. And as caregivers, that again is something that our caregivers should have taught us. So as a result, now as we grow up into adulthood, we struggle to self-soothe. We don't know what it looks like, you know, so we struggle to self-care, to self-love ourselves, and things like that. And then we get stuck in those distressing emotions, which is just really unpleasant, you know, and it can be really harmful as well.
Yes, and something similar to that is what I think you often hear called emotional dysregulation. And it's another control issue. You know, like Sarah said, when we cannot self-soothe, we can't self-comfort. Well, one of the other things that we can't do is regulate our own emotions. And most of that is because we were raised feeling like the emotions of others were what controlled us, that others controlled us. Well, the reality is a lot of times that was true, because when our father was raging, his rage controlled the home, right? The rest of us are going to learn to hide. If our mother is sobbing in the middle of family Christmas, then the rest of the family is going to be affected by that, and it's going to impact the way that we interact with each other and the way that we interact with her. I knew I was going to get it out of there. So we don't know how to control our own emotions. We don't know how to regulate our emotional states. Therefore, you know, we're out there in the world, and what's happening around us is regulating our emotions, instead of us being able to say, I'm okay, I don't need to respond to that, you know, I don't need to respond emotionally to that, and I'm in control of what I'm feeling, which makes for a much healthy relationship with other human beings.
Things that we can do as coaches is teach our clients to be able to love themselves. We can show our clients unconditional love, which then teaches them what love looks like and what a healthy relationship looks like. Many times we can see our clients come into our practices and they are disconnected from us, from themselves, because that's what trauma does. They feel bad, they feel that they're unworthy, they feel that they're unlovable. And as coaches, we're here to build up their self-esteem, their self-worth, so then they can go out into the world looking and knowing what a healthy relationship is, because we care for them and we unconditionally, we love them.
Yes, exactly. You know, and that's just one of the things that we can use relationship in our work with our clients to teach something. Another thing that we can do that is relationship oriented is called attunement. Attunement is a skill that a parent uses with a child. And what it does is it lets the child know that they are heard and understood and loved. And attunement is the process of, you know, usually I'm working with my client either in person or over Skype. And it's literally and figuratively the process of coming around and sitting down next to our client and saying, let me experience your viewpoint of what happened. Tell me what you were thinking. Tell me what you were feeling. Paint me a very, very detailed picture so that I know what your experience was. And it has attunement has a kinesthetic component to it, okay? We're not just sitting there nodding our head going, yep, okay, I got it. We're actually sitting in the same emotions that our client is. So we feel what they felt. That's the goal, is to feel what they felt. Because only when we can get to that deep of a level of connection with our clients can our clients begin to feel like they are heard and understood. Okay, so we use that tool of attunement, which is what our parents should have used with us had they been healthy. And then we wouldn't have had attachment difficulties. So when we use attunement with our clients now, our adult clients, it helps to heal some of that attachment damage, because for the first time in their lives, they feel like they're developing a healthy bond with another human being, and they begin to see themselves as worthy of that bond. You know, Sarah just talked about how when we build a relationship with a client, then we can model that concept of self-esteem. And when we use attunement, then we help our clients to develop self-esteem because they feel heard and understood. And then there's another skill that parents should have used with us when we were younger that we can now use with our clients as they're an adult, and it's the process of co-regulation. You remember we talked about emotional dysregulation, which was that everybody out here in the world around me is in control of my emotions. I am not in control of my emotions. But our parents should have sat down next to us when we were upset and helped us learn to identify, oh, you're feeling angry, or you're feeling frustrated, and then taught us that feeling those feelings was okay, and we were still safe, and it was still something that was under our control. We could choose to feel something different. We could implement self-soothing skills and feel better. Or we could, you know, do some deep breathing. I've seen children taught deep breathing strategies, and they are so helpful. And in it, we learn to control and regulate our emotions from inside of us, rather than letting the world at large control our emotions.
That's huge, absolutely huge, you know. And as coaches as well, we can come along and we can model healthy relationships and healthy skills in ourselves, which then teaches to the clients what it looks like. Things like boundaries. What do boundaries look like? And boundaries is a huge part in relationships. You know, how I self-care and self-love myself, you know, shows my client, you know, what it looks like, and for them to be able to say, okay, it's okay for me to self-love myself, and so, you know, We also help our clients learn about emotional literacy and emotional intelligence. Emotional literacy is basically very similar to like reading literacy. It's like learning your ABC. What does ABC sound like? It's very much, what does emotions look like? What does emotions feel like? What do they look like? Many times, you know, being brought up in an abusive relationship, we weren't taught emotions. Maybe emotions were not even allowed to be felt. You know, many times anger is a huge, scary emotion sort of thing. You know, a lot of times, you know, the abuser could be angry, but, you know, maybe I'm not allowed to be angry, you know. So we are taught that it's a bad emotion. So helping our clients know what emotions are, what they feel like, and knowing how to express their emotions in a safe environment, in a healthy relationship, is a huge key in teaching our clients to build on those relationship skills.
Yes, exactly. And one of the last ways that we use relationship to help our clients heal is related to Stephen Porges's polyvagal theory. So what Stephen Porges discovered through his research was that different people respond to things out in the environment different ways. And these trauma survivors were perceiving threats where there really was no threat, whereas people who were not trauma survivors were like, oh, okay, I think it's okay, I think it's fine. And then they would go off and do their thing and not respond with that fight or flight or freeze mode. And what he discovered by watching the non-trauma survivors was that people were using things unconsciously. This isn't a conscious process, but unconsciously they were using things like the person's facial expression or their body posture, eye contact, facial expression, and then something called prosody, which is the pattern of our speech patterns, and the intonation in our voice. So people were using all of those things to evaluate whether or not someone was safe or whether or not a situation was safe. But as trauma survivors, because we never had healthy relationships, we didn't learn anything about social engagement cues. You know, and social engagement cues are what stands between us and deciding whether or not to kick into fight or flight. Remembering, as we talked about earlier, that kicking into fight or flight has a cost attached to it because it affects us biologically. Those chemicals are not helpful to us because we've already met our, you know, lifetime quota, you know, so many times over. So if we can help teach our clients, have relationships with them that teach them, you know, watch for facial expression. What's the intonation? You know, what are the hand gestures? What's the body posture? What's the eye contact like? Then we can help them insert that between interacting with the world and having the fight or flight response. And the more that our clients can avoid being able to dip into fight or flight, the more able they are to actually connect with themselves and the world around us. You know, and what all of this tells us is something that I find heartbreaking about working in the field of trauma, is that sustaining trauma takes away the very thing that we need to heal from trauma. And it's the cruelest irony because trauma takes away our capacity to have healthy relationships. But healthy relationships are what we need to heal from trauma. And that's why we focus as trauma recovery coaches on building relationships with our clients.
Exactly, and that's why we love coming alongside our clients and being a placeholder for them. You know, we're not here to be in our clients' lives forever. We would absolutely love to be. You know, we love them unconditionally, but we want them to go out and build their lives, and from the skills that we have taught them, that they can go out and build new lives, new skills, new relationships, and have a healthy relationship and a life that they love to live. So it's an absolute honor and it's an absolute pleasure to see a client leave us, even though it's quite sad at the same time.
Yes, but it is a celebration.
It
To
is.
know that they're able to go out there in the world and, like Sarah said, build the life they love to live. We are so thankful for having you here today with us. We have one more day left in the summit, and we will be back here. Sarah and I are doing a brief video tomorrow to say thank you and let you know different options that you have to continue to learn information about trauma. Now, don't forget that there is the discount on the tuition of our certified trauma recovery coaching classes that are starting the end of August. So go over to www.iaotrc.com/summit, SUMMIT. This will bring you to the page where you will be able to register for our August classes. If you want to use the payment plan, then you'll get $200 off the price, $200 off the price of tuition. And if you want to pay in full, you'll get $300 off the price of tuition. And these discounts are valid through July 4th. So remember, when the fireworks start, the discount goes away. So we will see you tomorrow. And in the meantime, enjoy the interviews, and we look forward to connecting with you again later.
Bye, everybody.